I married Zach, the love of my life, this month. You would think that as newlyweds, we would be enjoying the bliss of our honeymoon, planning our future, or simply enjoying the beginning of this new chapter together. But instead, I find myself turning to Reddit today in desperate need of clarity and advice because my father is making my life unbearable. I can't help but wonder if I am the one at fault here. Let me give you some background. My dad gave me an ultimatum: invite my sister, who was involved with my ex, or he would skip my wedding. On the surface, asking my dad to walk me down the aisle at my wedding may seem like a kind, conventional gesture, but it's important to remember that my dad and I have never been close, primarily because of his attitude toward me. You see, my mom died while giving birth to me while my dad was away on a work trip. When my mom unexpectedly went into labor, there were complications. She suffered severe blood loss, and despite the efforts of the doctors, they were unable to save her. When my dad returned, he was confronted with the heartbreaking news. I know on some level that losing my mom the way he did must have been devastating for him, but over the years, it became clear that his grief had turned into resentment towards me. This resentment wasn't subtle. It was loud and evident in how he treated me. I've often felt like I was carrying the weight of guilt for something I couldn't control. He had been told that his wife was gone and that all he had left was me, a newborn he had never met, and that I was the one who survived when my mother didn't. My older sister, Mary, who is 4 years older than me, once told me that when I was a child, my father wouldn't even look at me. He said that he would tell everyone who would listen that I reminded him too much of my mother, and he didn't like that. He hired a full-time nanny, and I was left with her for the majority of the day. As a result, I spent my childhood feeling abandoned and unwelcome. Although this rejection was never explicitly stated to me, I grew up feeling it deeply. Mary, on the other hand, was always Dad's favorite. That's not just my opinion. Mary and I have both acknowledged this over the years. My dad didn't even try to hide it. He showered her with care and attention in ways I could only imagine. She was the golden child, the one who could do no wrong, while I was just there. I remember that after I turned 10 or 11, I was given the role of family helper, and Dad would assign me to do the household chores while Mary was excused from doing anything. When I questioned why, he would explain that Mary needed to concentrate on her studies and shouldn't be bothered with chores like doing the laundry or the dishes. But he said that I should learn how to handle these things because I wasn't as good academically as Mary and might wind up being a stay-at-home wife. This was unfair, but he didn't care. I was left to pick up the slack. I would clean, scrub, and fold clothes, and if I ever dared to complain or ask for help, Dad would become irate and threaten to ground me or take away my phone, which felt like the worst punishment a child could receive. I was informed that it was unnecessary or a waste of money, but Mary seemed to get everything she wanted without even thinking twice. If I got lost and called him to come get me, he would simply refuse and tell me to find a way home on my own, even if that meant walking. However, if Mary needed a ride, whether it was 5 minutes away or an hour away, Dad would drop everything to be there for her. There were no questions, no excuses, just unwavering dedication for her. Over time, the unfairness became unbearable, and Mary began using her father's bias to make things even more difficult for me. For example, if something broke around the house, she would blame me right away, knowing full well that no matter how much I denied it or clarified what happened, Dad would support her and punish me. Mary would use my love of arts and crafts as a means of demeaning me. I've always been creative and enjoy making things with my hands, but Mary would use this passion to make fun of me by telling Dad that I was immature and childish, and that arts and crafts were only for unmotivated people. He would not stand up for me. Instead, he would make fun of me. When I stood up for myself or disagreed with Dad, Mary would jump in to defend him, portraying me as a disrespectful and challenging child. At one point during an argument, she even went so far as to say that Mom would have been ashamed to have given birth to someone like me, adding that she wished I had been the one who didn't make it because I was making her and Dad's lives miserable. That statement broke my heart because it was something that made me happy, but it also became another reason for my family to treat me like I didn't measure up. I became extremely cautious around Mary and Dad as a result of hearing such things from my father and sibling almost every other day. I felt like I was always on guard to avoid saying or doing anything that might cause them to criticize or punish me. I was tired of being held responsible for Mom's death, so I began counting down the days and years until I could leave for college. When I finally had the opportunity, I didn't look back. I moved out and eventually got away from home. I worked hard at my job so I could support myself, and it felt like I finally had a taste of freedom, the ability to live life on my terms without my dad and sister's constant shadow hanging over me. After I moved out, things with Dad improved a little, not because we got closer, but because we didn't see each other as much. The physical distance made it easier to avoid arguments in tense situations. Meanwhile, Mary, who never sought a steady job, stayed with Dad rent-free for years. She would tell everyone that this was her money-saving tactic, but I knew she simply enjoyed being pampered and favored by my father, who enjoyed taking care of her despite the fact that she was an adult who should have been taught to be more self-reliant and responsible. She was happy to allow him to do so. On Thanksgiving, my father invited my then boyfriend and me to spend the holidays at his house. I wasn't thrilled about it because we weren't close to them, but I accepted out of courtesy. My boyfriend and I decided to spend the remaining 3 nights with his family, where it was friendlier and more welcoming. Mary met my ex during that visit. She was constantly flirting with him in ways that felt completely inappropriate from the moment they were introduced. She kept complimenting him, calling him handsome and charming, while subtly demeaning me by saying that she never imagined her average-looking sister would end up with someone like him. I was offended, but I didn't want to start a fight with her in front of my then boyfriend. But her behavior went too far when she started making up reasons to touch him lightly. When I tried to handle the situation maturely, I pulled her aside and gently asked her to calm down, explaining that her actions might be making him uncomfortable. Mary, true to form, brushed me off, saying that I was overreacting and that I should stop ruining the evening with my jealousy. She even laughed at me after dinner when my dad went upstairs to his room, leaving Mary and my ex to watch a movie together in the living room, which quickly devolved into yet another awkward situation. Mary kept finding excuses to argue with my ex, like a child, nudging him, teasing him, and leaning into his personal space. What was worse was that my ex seemed to be enjoying all the attention, and while I wouldn't say he was openly reciprocating her flirtation, he certainly wasn't discouraging it either. Seeing them both made me feel completely marginalized, as if I were a spare wheel to my boyfriend, and I thought my boyfriend would eventually join me in my room, but he never did. The following morning, I woke up early, and the house was eerily quiet. Something felt off right away, especially since I noticed that my then boyfriend hadn't slept beside me throughout the night. It was humiliating. At one point during the movie, I couldn't take it any longer because I was exhausted emotionally and physically, and the weight of feeling disrespected in my own family's home was too much. I went downstairs to check on him because I was worried and a little suspicious that he might have fallen asleep on the couch while watching the movie, but he wasn't there. A pit formed in my stomach as I considered where else he might be. Against my better judgment, I walked towards Mary's room, my heart pounding, and when I opened the door, my worst fear was realized. My sister and my ex were sleeping in bed together, partially clothed, on the floor, with 2 empty wine bottles and glasses next to them. The sight made my head spin. I couldn't contain my anger when I discovered that he had been with my sister Mary, the one person who had already made my life difficult for as long as I could remember. I screamed, startling them awake, and started angrily throwing pillows at them. My ex started stuttering apologies, repeatedly claiming that it was an error and blaming the alcohol, saying that they had both been too inebriated to know what they were doing, as if that was meant to excuse it. Mary's response left me speechless. Her complete lack of regret, her arrogance, and her attempt to turn the situation around on me left me stunned. She never apologized, didn't even seem embarrassed or regretful, and instead dared to tell me to leave her room so that she could get dressed. She yelled at me for invading her privacy, as if I was at fault for discovering them. I told my dad what had happened, expecting that he would share my outrage or provide some sort of support. At first, he seemed just as shocked and appalled as I was, and for a brief moment, I thought he might stand by me. However, his tone changed, and he clarified that even though he didn't agree with Mary's actions, he wasn't going to get involved because Mary and my ex were both adults and could do whatever they wanted. He acted as though my sister's behavior was a mistake that could be easily ignored rather than a monumental betrayal. Dad's attempts to shift the blame back to me were even worse. He claimed that I should have been more cautious about the type of man I had brought into the family because my ex had a questionable character, so it was essentially my fault for bringing him around Mary. It seemed as though he thought I should have foreseen my ex's betrayal, or, worse, that I had purposefully set myself up for this heartbreak. His remarks made me feel as though I was losing my sense of reality. My sister was not an innocent bystander in this situation. She actively pursued my ex, knowing how much it would hurt me, but my dad completely minimized her role, essentially absolving her of any responsibility while placing all the blame on me. It seemed as though he refused to hold Mary responsible for anything she did, no matter how selfish or unkind it was. In the end, I knew what I had to do. I ended my relationship with my ex right away because there was no turning back from what he had done, and I couldn't stay with someone who would betray me so severely, especially with my sister. As for Mary, I severed all ties with her after this. She never expressed regret or even apologized, instead turning the situation into something positive. The last straw was when she went around boasting to our cousins about how she had taken my partner in a single night and even claimed that he had allegedly told her she was more appealing than me. She did this with pride, as if hurting me was some sort of twisted victory for her. My relationship with my dad also soured because he refused to hold Mary accountable, and his decision to support her, even indirectly, was the last straw. I stopped communicating with him. However, things changed out of nowhere earlier this year. My dad had a major health scare. It was serious, and while the doctors were able to save him, the experience left him weak and in need of care. Despite all the pain and resentment I harbored, I was the one who stepped up to help him, not out of obligation, but because I knew I had the means and the heart to do it. I had already lost my mom, and despite everything, I didn't want to lose my dad too. I took on a lot of the responsibilities for his recovery. I paid for medical bills that his insurance didn't cover and hired a caretaker to make sure he was comfortable and recovering well at home. It wasn't easy, but I did it because it felt right. My sister, on the other hand, didn't do much to help. Her pay wasn't enough to cover anything significant, and she didn't seem particularly motivated to help either. She just let me take care of all of Dad's duties. I suppose it was at this point that Dad's eyes finally opened to the reality, and he realized how much I was caring for him while Mary wasn't contributing. It was a healing moment, and while it didn't erase everything, it opened the door for us to start rebuilding our relationship. We started talking more, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like there was hope for us. So when I started planning my wedding, inviting my dad felt like the right thing to do. Suddenly, he apologized to me, acknowledging how he had treated me growing up, how he had failed to be there for me, and how he had let Mary's actions hurt me the most. Despite everything, our relationship seemed to be slowly getting better, and I wanted him to be there for such a significant event in my life. However, I was unable to invite Mary because she had never expressed regret or apologized for what she had done to me. Instead, she and I had no relationship, and I wanted to keep it that way. However, my dad, who may have been emboldened by our renewed connection, started to insist that Mary had changed and deserved a second chance. So I asked him bluntly, if Mary had truly changed, why hadn't she reached out to me even once to apologize? If she was sorry, surely an apology wouldn't be too much to ask. However, instead of seeing things my way, Dad doubled down and said I should let things go and not press Mary for an apology, claiming that my wedding was the ideal chance for a new beginning for everyone and that it had been years since the incident with my ex. I couldn't believe he was asking me to do this after everything I had been through and everything Mary had done. He wanted me to simply forgive and move on without even acknowledging her actions. My dad flatly stated that if Mary wasn't invited, he wouldn't be attending either, nor would he walk me down the aisle. He even attempted to sway me by claiming that their absence would lead to gossip and that if Mary wanted to make amends, the first step would be an apology. The harm she caused felt like yet another instance of him justifying her behavior while expecting me to take the high road. But this time, I wasn't going to let that happen. I told him no. I'd understood that was just another example of him attempting to control the situation and guilt-trip me into doing what he wanted. But I had decided that I wouldn't allow him or anyone else to control me, so I disinvited him completely. Instead, I turned to my paternal grandfather and asked him to walk me down the aisle. When I told Grandpa about the situation, he immediately agreed, saying he was honored to assume the role, and he didn't hold back in expressing his disappointment in my dad's behavior. Grandpa, like many other members of our family, was aware of my dad's partiality and how he had blamed me for my mother's death throughout my life. He was extremely disappointed that, despite everything, Dad hadn't changed. Nevertheless, my wedding day was lovely, and Grandpa proudly walked me down the aisle. We had a great time celebrating with those who genuinely cared about me and my happiness. It felt like the fresh start I'd always imagined, surrounded by love and support. But of course my dad wasn't there. Dad wasn't going to let things go so easily after the wedding. He threw a huge fit when he learned about it. He called me very upset and said he couldn't believe I planned a wedding without him. He acknowledged that he had fully expected me to back down and invite him back, and he was angry that I had asked Grandpa to take his place, insisting that Grandpa had no right to walk me down the aisle. However, what seemed to upset Dad the most was the wedding gift I had received from Grandpa. I was overwhelmed with gratitude when Grandpa made a surprise announcement to me during this entire process. He said he was giving me his vacation house as a wedding gift, wanting me and my husband to make new memories there. He said he believed that I was the one who truly understood the value of family and the memories that came with the house, and he knew that I would cherish it and take care of it just as he had. His gesture meant the world to me, but it angered my dad because he was Grandpa's only child. Dad always thought he would inherit everything, including the vacation house, but now that it has been given to me, he feels betrayed. Since the wedding, my dad and Mary have been accusing me of taking the vacation house from them, saying that my dad is legally entitled to inherit it as Grandpa's only child, and they have been pressuring me to return it to him. The accusations are not only unfair but also ridiculous, with Mary being the most vocal in supporting my dad and painting me as someone who took advantage. Grandpa's generosity is being used to answer some of the most frequently asked questions. First, is your sister married? No, my sister isn't married yet, but she doesn't stay in long-term relationships with anyone. Second, why does your adult sister still live with your dad? Well, it's because Mary is my dad's golden child, and he's her safety net. They have always had a codependent relationship, and it seems to work for them. Dad loves to spoil her endlessly, while I've worked hard to support myself. Mary continues to rely on my dad for everything, even though she doesn't have a steady job or savings. My grandparents have always been a part of my life and have tried to help me as much as they could. They did try to talk to my dad on multiple occasions, but he never changed. Overall, it wasn't their job to raise me, it was my dad's. He should have taken responsibility and been the parent I needed. I understand that he was grieving and that losing my mom was devastating for him, but that doesn't excuse his neglect or favoritism as a parent. All I felt as a child was unloved and unwanted, and my dad was the adult, the parent, and he should have been the one to get over his grief and take care of me. Has your dad dated anyone since your mom died? No, my dad has stayed single for all these years, and I don't think he ever fully recovered from her passing. Today, I met with my dad, who had been phoning and messaging me nonstop for weeks, and I finally decided it was time to meet him in person to put an end to this ongoing situation. When we met, I firmly told him that I was no longer going to continue this cycle. My dad, as expected, didn't take this well. He called me controlling and unkind, accusing me of taking something that he believed rightfully belonged to him. He told me that I had already taken so much from him over the years, and even now, I seem to have taken another thing from him. His words didn't surprise me, but they still hurt. I told him that he needed to let go of the idea that he was entitled to inherit the vacation house. I asked him directly, "Why do you hate me so much? What have I ever done to you?" I asked him questions that seemed to catch him off guard, but I persisted. I told him that I've always known that he blamed me for my mother's death, but was that the only reason he resented me? I reminded him that I was only a baby when my mother passed away, so what did he expect me to do to save her? I was innocent, and if anyone should feel bad, it was him for not being there for my mom instead of being away on a work trip. I could feel the weight of my words hanging in the air as my dad tried to avoid answering me directly at first. But I persisted and told him that this was his chance to finally say whatever was on his mind once and for all. Just let it all out. This is when my dad finally admitted the truth, telling me that he never wanted a second child and that when Mom got pregnant with me, he was against it. He had spent my entire life punishing me for something that was beyond my control. He explained how, despite the doctor's warnings about the risks, Mom had insisted on having me, and Dad had urged her to terminate the pregnancy. Overall, it was her choice, and he was powerless to stop it. So when she died giving birth to me, he blamed me for taking her away from him. He told me that he wished I had never been born for years, and that as I grew older and began to look more like Mom, it only made him miss her even more. His heart broke as he spoke. Dad said that he didn't realize I was also more like her in strength and values. My dad told me that he had hoped my wedding would make everything better and that he wanted to show up as a united family at my wedding. But when I didn't invite Mary, he admitted that Mary never reminded him of Mom because she was more like him and never forced him to face his pain. This is when he finally began to feel this overwhelming sense of guilt, and that's when he apologized to me. He said he genuinely regretted the way he treated me, but he couldn't help himself because my sister was easier to deal with. He claimed that asking Grandpa to walk me down the aisle was the biggest betrayal I could have done to him and that I had robbed him of the experience of being a father. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. After everything he had done to me, he still dared to blame me. It seemed like I had done something wrong when all I had ever done was try to mend a relationship that was always one-sided. I scoffed at his remarks, feeling both hurt and numb, telling him that I was never going to try again. At this point, I had finished trying to mend things with him because it was obvious that I would always be the family scapegoat. He didn't deserve my care or effort, and I told him that if he ever ended up in the hospital again, He should not expect me to pay his medical bills or assist him any longer. Instead, he should rely on his beloved daughter Mary, who is incapable of handling her finances every month. I'd also reminded Dad that Grandpa had given me the vacation house, and I told him that if he had any issues with it, he could take it up with Grandpa because I was tired of trying to defend my actions or explain myself. Dad tried to argue with me further, but I left him right away because I was done listening to him. Since then, Dad has called me multiple times, but I haven't bothered to answer. I'm just tired of his negative presence and want to focus on my marriage. Throughout all of this, my husband Zach has been an incredible support system. He understands the problems in my family and helps me. Update 3. It's been nearly a month since my last update, and even after our talk, my dad has persisted in trying to guilt trip me. He apologized repeatedly for the things he said and the way he treated me, hoping that I would change my mind and think twice about cutting him off. He also said that he would truly need me by his side if he ever got sick again because I was the only person he could trust to take care of him. However, no matter how many times I read his messages, nothing changed. His words felt hollow and too little, too late. His apologies were just another attempt to regain control, and I wasn't buying it. Mary, on the other hand, sent me a lengthy, frustrated message accusing me of everything. She said that it was unfair of me to threaten to cut off Dad and that he had already suffered greatly as a result of me. She also said that I was the cause of the family's disconnection. She even went so far as to say that I had taken Dad's vacation house and that I would receive my consequences. I did not waste time responding to her. I simply blocked her. She is free to complain and say what she wants, but the vacation house is mine, and she is unable to change it.